All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to talk about something you've probably heard of, but maybe don't know a ton about: modern paganism. Yeah, that word, pagan, it conjures up all kinds of stuff, right? You might think of ancient druids, Stonehenge, maybe something straight out of a fantasy novel. But what's the real story? What does it actually mean to be a pagan in the 21st century? So, is it just people trying to bring back the old ways? Well, the truth is, it's way more complex, and honestly, a whole lot more fascinating than that. And that really gets us to the heart of the matter. The big question we're going to unpack. Is modern paganism this ancient thing that's been passed down for thousands of years, or is it something brand new, just inspired by the past?
Okay, first things first, we have to define our terms. Because paganism isn't some simple, neat little box. It's a huge, sprawling idea with a really complicated history.
Okay, so check this out. On the one hand, you have the ancient world, and on the other, a totally modern ritual. This is the key thing to get. Modern paganism is a new religious movement. It's deeply inspired by those ancient pre-Christian beliefs for sure, but the people practicing it today, they're living right now in our world. So here's the more, academic definition. It's a bunch of modern religions that are self-consciously inspired by these really old pre-Christian belief systems. And that word inspired is doing a lot of work here. It's not about an unbroken chain going back thousands of years. It's a revival, a reimagining for today. And it's definitely not one single religion. There's no pagan pope, no single holy book. The best way to think about it is as a big umbrella term. Just like Abrahamic religions is an umbrella that covers Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they're related, but they're not the same thing. Here's a little trick that scholars use to keep things straight, and it's actually pretty useful. Big P paganism, that's the modern movement we're talking about today. Little p paganism, that's for the original historical faiths from way back when. A tiny detail, but it makes a world of difference. Oh, I love this quote. It just sums it up so perfectly. All these different pagan faiths are like siblings who have taken different paths in life, but still retain many visible similarities. They're all doing their own thing, but you can totally tell they're related. There's that family resemblance. Okay, so if it's this big, diverse family, what do they all have in common? What's the glue that holds it all together? Let's talk about the shared worldview you'll find in most of these paths. All right, at the core of it all, you've got a few big ideas. First up, polytheism. That just means belief in many gods and goddesses. Then you have animism, this idea that everything has a spirit, the trees, the rivers, even the rocks. And that connects to pantheism, which is the belief that the divine isn't some guy in the sky, it is the universe, it's nature itself. All of this leads to a deep reverence for the earth. Now, here is something that really sets paganism apart from a lot of the big world religions. The divine feminine is a huge deal. Goddesses are front and center, often balancing out the male gods. You can see that idea of balance right here on this Wiccan altar. It's a really core principle. And these gods and goddesses, they aren't seen as perfect or all-knowing like, say, the god in monotheistic faiths. Nope, they're way more complex. They're powerful and wise, for sure, but they also reflect all the messy, beautiful, and sometimes even funny parts of life itself. Okay, so how do people actually practice this stuff? Well, inside this big pagan forest, there are basically two main paths people take. On one end of the spectrum, you've got the Reconstructionists. These are the history buffs. They're digging into archaeology, ancient texts, all the academic stuff, trying to rebuild a specific tradition, like the Old Norse or Greek religions, as accurately as possible. Then, on the other end, you've got the eclectics. They take a more mix-and-match approach, blending ideas and practices from different traditions to build a spiritual path that feels right for them. And this quote from Michael Stromiska, man, it just hits the nail on the head. Reconstructionist pagans romanticize the past, while eclectic pagans idealize the future. It's such a perfect way to capture that difference in focus. One is looking backward for authenticity, the other is looking forward to create something new. And that whole spectrum, from one end to the other, is filled with an amazing variety of traditions. You've got Wicca, which is probably the one most people have heard of, but there's also heathenry, which is all about Norse and Germanic beliefs, Druidry, inspired by the ancient Celts, Hellenism, which brings back the Greek gods. I mean, every single symbol you see here represents a whole spiritual universe. So where did this whole movement even come from? Let's get into the history and really tackle that ancient versus new question head on.
Look, the experts are pretty much all in agreement on this one. Modern paganism isn't some ancient religion that's been hiding in the shadows for 2,000 years. It's just not. To quote Strumska again, it's modern people making a new religion. They're using the pieces of the past, but they're building something new for today. You can see the seeds of it way back in the Romantic era when people got really into folklore and old cultures. But the movement as we know it really kicks off in the 1950s with a guy named Gerald Gardner, who basically creates Wicca. Then, in the 70s, it gets a huge boost from the feminist movement. And then, bam, the 1990s and the internet. Suddenly, people who thought they were totally alone could find each other. And the whole thing just exploded.
Which brings us right up to today. So, who are these people? Who is actually drawn to these reimagined faiths in our modern world? Well, the numbers might actually surprise you. It's tough to get a perfect head count, obviously, but solid estimates put the number at well over 1 million people just in Western countries, and that number is growing. This isn't some tiny fringe thing. And get this stat really blows a lot of stereotypes out of the water. In the US, over 65% of pagans have a college degree or higher. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, right? A lot of these paths don't have a single holy book telling you what to believe. You're expected to do your own research, to study history, to think critically, and to build your own spiritual path. That kind of approach tends to attract people who like to learn. So that leaves us with one final big question to think about. In our super modern, high-tech world, why is this happening? What is it about these nature-focused polytheistic faiths, these new religions inspired by the ancient world, that's speaking to so many people? What does this modern revival really tell us about what we're all looking for today?